hi everyone. My name's Anna. I graduated from the CMDB program in 2015. I was in Haiqing Zhao's lab, and my PhD was actually on a protein that, I don't know, maybe Haiqing's lab is still studying, and you guys probably hear about all the time. Called CFAP69. I'm actually not sure if there's like a new name for it now. But is anyone actually on the call in Haiqing's lab or in any of the mouse labs? So back when I was doing my
Yeah,
PhD, it was like the mouse tri lab. So it was like Samar Hattar, Reggie, Haiqing.
yeah,
Anybody
I'm
on the
in
call?
Haiqing's lab. I'm a fourth year graduate student. My name is Louis.
Oh, awesome.
So
Well,
yeah, no one currently is working on CFAP 69 at the
oh,
moment.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah. So when I left, I know Fred was working on it.
yeah,
But
Fred was the
and I
last
know,
person.
yeah, right. Awesome. Well, that's good. I'm gonna have to reconnect with Haiqing sometime soon to see
Yeah,
what he's up to. But okay, awesome. So yeah, the talk I'm gonna kind of give today is gonna be, a talk plus like a case study. It's on, a kind of department or function in the pharma industry called medical affairs. When I was a graduate student, I mean, we don't, we never knew much about the pharmaceutical industry, and I felt like all I kind of knew about was that I can go into research and development and work in a lab. But that's not true. That there's PhDs basically in every part of the pharma industry, including in medical affairs. And I thought it would be kind of important for you guys to learn about this specific department because it's kind of very niche. It's not research and development. It's not like the marketing. We're like the arm of the pharmaceutical industry that does like the deep medical and scientific work, but also we interface a lot with like the physicians, with the scientists, with the people working in labs. We help kind of drive where our next research area is going to be and things like that. So it's still, very scientific, but it kind of veers towards a little bit more like corporate work rather than like being in the lab. But you also, in medical affairs, there's also lots of opportunities to actually design your own experiments and things like that. However, it's usually not, in a lab setting, but it's using, data that's available to us from clinical trials or registries and things like that. So let me see. So first, I want to uh, give a little disclaimer. So when I first started working in pharma, I didn't know, any of the language. And just like when we start our PhDs, or if you're an undergrad and start working in a lab, it's difficult to read the papers. It's a learning curve, right? So same thing, in like the corporate pharma world, the pharmaceutical language is like a type of language, and there's a lot of terms that I may use. And if you don't know what it is, just ask me to explain because they are specialized terms. And usually the terms are related to like a specific like job function or process. And, I didn't know any of them. It, probably took me 2 years to learn. And actually at BMS, there's so many like terms and acronyms still, that we have like an acronym and term glossary for all employees because it's overwhelming. So if I use any terminology that you're unsure of, just let me know and I can try to do my best to define it. What is medical affairs and why is it relevant for PhDs? So I kind of described this a little bit. Medical affairs is basically the bridge between the commercial functions, meaning like the marketing and the sales and the business strategy, and the research and development and the clinical trials. So there's a lot that, is kind of in the middle, and, because it would be really difficult for, scientists just to talk to the business people about the research. There has to be kind of somebody in the middle, translating the information internally. Plus, we also translate the information, externally as well. So, people who work in sales and marketing, they might not have the same type of, capabilities, as us PhDs in order to talk about the science or talk about the medicine, talk about the mechanism of action for like a certain drug. And that's where medical affairs comes in. And we kind of do a lot of interfacing with healthcare professionals. And, PhDs are very much needed in medical affairs, because they do have that, scientific knowledge. So in, medical affairs, basically everyone that I work with are PhDs, they're MDs, they're MBAs, they're PharmDs. They're people even with bachelors that have some sort of degree. They're like biological sciences degree. So, all of us are kind of, really, science and medicine focused. And we're really the scientific voice of the company, the scientific and medical voice of the company. So we engage really highly, with the scientific and medical community and academic institutions. There's clinical studies being conducted at academic institutions, and we have contacts with, the physicians and scientists that are conducting those studies, and, just strong relationships. And then, we also call, kind of some of the top, kind of physicians and top scientists in the fields. We call them either key opinion leaders or thought leaders. So that's just kind of, people that we've identified that really help to give us a lot of knowledge about what's going on, like on the ground, like as they're practicing medicine. They kind of tell us like what their needs are, what trends they're seeing, and they kind of help us, drive the medical strategy. And then the other kind of cool thing about medical affairs is that it really does require a mix of skills. You need that scientific and medical knowledge. You need people skills. That's really important because on a daily basis, you're interfacing with, with people in academic institutions, either, MDs, PhDs, and they're just, the leaders in their field. You're interfacing with people in your own company. And, you're also interfacing with agencies that help you do the work. So you're constantly talking to people. And then you also need some business acumen. And that's something that we really, during my PhD, I didn't have that. I don't know, maybe I still don't have it, but, that business acumen you kind of gain after working in the industry for a while. It's really just kind of a learned trait unless you go and get an MBA after your PhD, which is not a bad idea, but, business acumen can be learned, and acquired. So, next, I kind of want to talk about the types of roles that we can find in medical affairs. So this is literally just a snapshot. This isn't, all the roles that are kind of available, within medical affairs. Medical affairs is a big branch of a pharmaceutical industry. and there's probably like 100 different functions, and it also depends what company you're at. You know, they break down these functions into different titles, but in the end, it's kind of, you know, the same type of role. So first are field roles, and you might have heard, and I'm sure, you know, that this is a really popular role for PhD students actually. Field roles include medical science liaisons. So these are basically the scientists that are out in the field, and they're the ones that are going to visit doctors that use, you know, the specific medicine or in the specific like therapeutic area that the MSL, medical science liaison, functions in. And you know, they can cover a certain territory. Say, for example, you are a medical science liaison only in Texas, and you're only working on, you know, a kidney transplant drug or something like that. So you basically know all the kidney transplant physicians in Texas, and you kind of visit them when they have a problem. You try to form relationships with them. You try to educate them, you know, on the drug. They probably educate you on, you know, the actual like clinical aspect, more so than you know, you would educate them. But you're kind of like the scientific voice. You're the person that is talking to the physicians and gathering insights. So insights could mean, you know, anything from, you know, during COVID, basically everybody was talking about, well, you know, my patients want a kidney transplant, or they're on the list to get a kidney transplant, but I'm worried that, you know, the drugs that they have to take before and after a kidney transplant will lower their immune system. And, you know, the medical science liaisons were the people that were talking to the physicians, trying to give that scientific information, and, you know, any type of like information and studies that we have access to, you know, to help like them make more informed decisions. So, you know, it's really an important role. You're really a scientific leader, and you're kind of, you know, you're in the field. You're really like helping, you know, physicians make better decisions for their patients. So that's one type of role. So another role is in medical strategy, and typically these are, you know, what's called medical directors. They can be MDs, PhDs, PharmDs. There's some companies that prefer to have MDs as medical directors, but you know, that's not always the case. There's plenty of PhDs that are medical directors. So what these folks do is that they kind of set the medical strategy for the particular either therapeutic area or the product meaning the drug. And you know, they kind of provide the overall kind of scientific narrative, you know, medical narrative. And we're going to do a little exercise later, and we're going to create a medical strategy for a drug that I made up. And just to kind of get a taste of what, you know, this type of role could be and how it interfaces with like, you know, other roles that are shown here, and how it interfaces with, you know, external academic institutions, et cetera. So another role in medical affairs is publications. So this is what I do. I lead publications, and you know what this is. It's also kind of like a strategy role, and I basically help not actually write the publications, but I kind of oversee the general strategy, publication strategy, and the Congress strategy. So what type of data and messaging are we bringing to a Congress? What type of messaging are we going to put in this publication? When should this publication, you know, kind of be published based on when we are launching the drug or something like that. There's just a lot of aspects that go into this role, including, I have influence in the data generation strategy, because the data generation strategy is, down the line going to be what's published, right? So we want to make sure we're integrating all our efforts to make like our publication strategy really on target with our medical strategy. So another role is scientific content. So this is different than publications. Content is materials that the field roles use. So medical science liaisons don't come empty-handed to go see, one of their physicians, kidney transplant physicians, right? They come prepared with materials. During COVID, it was really clear that this was the hot topic and that this is what, physicians were asking about. So our scientific content team prepared a ton of materials, question and answer documents, these things called standard response documents. Once you get like very specific questions, and the pharma industry is so regulated that, basically any type of like response that we provide to physicians has to be kind of tempered language wise, and it has to be tempered. Like we can't make kind of misleading statements. So we have really just documents that guide discussion. And then honestly, the field, the field roles, do have some leeway to discuss kind of like things that are not on label, meaning like not approved uses for the drug. If say a physician is using like some sort of drug that isn't approved for kidney transplant, but he's like, it's also an immunosuppressant, it works well for this patient population. So, they have the liberty to discuss that, but it's, that doesn't happen very often. So the scientific content leads are the ones that are shaping these documents. They're the ones that are kind of getting all this insight from the field and being like, okay, well, we're getting a lot of questions right now about, the use of immunosuppressants and the use of immunosuppressants in vaccines, for example. That's like a new hot topic, obviously. So they're the ones that are doing the research and creating the content that's needed. They're digging into the data that's available and crafting it into like a document that then people can use. Sorry, it's my New York apartment with the windows facing Second Ave, and you can hear like literally everything that goes by. So another type of role is Congress support. So there's dedicated people in medical affairs that just help us go to these big congresses. If you've been to these huge, like, cell biology, I forget what ACSB, I can't remember what the Congress is, but like the big cell biology Congress. When I was in the CMDB program, we went to SFN, and it's like the largest Congress I've ever been to. And pharmaceutical companies, they have posters and presentations too, because they're doing basic research, they're doing clinical research. There's PhDs there, there's MDs there, there's MD PhDs there, and they just want to present their research too. So that, in addition to, I'm sure you've seen like the big exhibit booths. The large part of like the exhibit booths at, say, for example, an SFN, the Society for Neuroscience Congress, a large part of that, the booth is like the commercial marketing booth. And then if you like go around the back, you'll find a very small portion that says like Novartis Medical Affairs or BMS Medical Affairs, and that's where you're going to find all the medical affairs people. We have to be very separate from the commercial folks, so typically they literally like have the booth face the opposite direction in the corner. and that's just due to like regulatory stuff. But so there's people that help us, go to these congresses, and they're part of medical affairs too. So, they can work within an entire therapeutic area. So my therapeutic area is immunology and fibrosis, and that includes gastroenterology, it includes rheumatology, it includes dermatology, and then fibrosis. So if you're like a Congress support lead for, let's say, immunology and fibrosis, you could be helping support, Congress strategy at like 20 congresses a year, which is kind of cool if you like to travel, because then you get to go to 20 congresses a year, if you like that. So that's just another type of role that's, really awesome. And, you get to travel a lot, you get to learn a lot. And it's just fun. And these Congress people, they also have really strong relationships with the Congress team themselves. So they get to interface a lot with the actual societies. So the Society for Neuroscience, or like the Cell Biology Society, et cetera. Another type of role in medical affairs is governance and compliance. And these are like the medical compliance experts. Basically my sworn enemy. I'm just kidding. But, pharma industry is super highly regulated. Everything we do goes through multiple checks and balances in terms of compliance and documentation even. So, I'll just take an example, like a clinical trial that I'm working on. That's like the drug's already on the market. This is a phase 4 trial. It's a comparative trial between 2 drugs. There's so much compliance documentation that we have to do and collect during the publication process. And we actually have like compliance experts that work within medical affairs to make sure everything we're doing is compliant. I rely on them very heavily because in publications, we just have to make sure we're very compliant with both the process, how we interact with the external authors, and things like that. So another type of role in med affairs is medical data generation, and these are our trial leads. So this is a little bit different than like clinical trial, phase 1, 2, 3 trials. This is trials for either they could be like a post hoc analysis. So say you already had a phase 3 trial, you published the what we call the top line results. So this is just like, the major points, your efficacy result, your safety result, et cetera. So you already published that. You have so much data, and you can kind of look at the data in any way you want to. You could look at, you could stratify the population by baseline characteristics, by BMI. You can, look at, was this drug more effective in this population? What about, a couple of years down the line, if you're still collecting data, you can, look at the patients at that time. So in medical data generation, and they kind of collaborate a lot with our medical directors, they kind of design these, what we call post hoc analyses, in order to kind of get like a deeper dive into the data, in order to kind of learn more. And a lot of times, this kind of drives the future strategy. So, for example, the product that I work on, it works better in a certain population of patients that have a certain biomarker. And the only reason we know that is because our medical directors and our medical data generation team was able to tease this out from the data. And it's actually, in the end, it turns out that, it has a huge effect if you do or don't have this biomarker. And, the drug is either more or less efficacious in this population. The other thing that the medical data generation leads do is they review proposals for what we call investigator-sponsored trials. So these are trials that are conducted independently, and you know, so say a researcher at Hopkins wants to, you know, conduct some sort of trial using the drug, you know, an immunosuppressive drug on this certain patient population, but it's not approved for that. But there's, you know, there's some sort of scientific rationale for it, et cetera. So any types of proposals that come in for those types of studies where they either want to use our study drug and they want us to provide the drug, or they want some sort of like monetary support to conduct this trial, our trial leads actually review the scientific and medical merit for the trials, and they kind of, you know, either say yes or no, if that makes sense. So this is just a kind of like a snapshot of the types of roles that are in medical affairs. You can see that, you know, for PhDs can do any one of these. Of course, you need some sort of, you know, training beforehand, and oftentimes you can't just go directly into a role like this. But honestly, after like, you know, getting your feet wet, either, you know, working for like a medcom company or consulting or something like that, after 2 years, if, you know, you can basically kind of break into these roles. So let me see what I have next. So the next thing I want to do is kind of talk about two roles a little bit more deeply, because we're going to then combine the functions of these two roles in order to do a case study and show kind of, or like, we're going to try to show how these two roles work together in order to set a medical strategy. So first I want to talk about the medical director role. The medical director is responsible for driving, you know, the medical scientific strategy for either a therapeutic area or a particular therapy or drug. And I actually mentioned this before, they really provide that medical direction to develop and approve study synopses, protocols, study reports. So these are like clinical study protocols. They'll review them, any types of, you know, clinical study outputs, they'll review them. And then they also help provide a lot of direction to health economics and outcomes research, which I didn't talk about, but that's also a big part of medical affairs. They basically provide oversight and then approve materials. So it could be these slide presentations, the Q&As that I mentioned for field medicals. They look at health outcomes models. They look at clinical trial publications, Congress presentations, publications. So the medical director kind of, you know, for me, like I work really closely hand in hand with my medical director. She reviews all of the publication materials. She kind of provides input early on, you know, and makes sure that everything is medically and scientifically sound. And, you know, just we have a really healthy working relationship. And then I'm, you know, also kind of working with her on the medical data generation strategy, because that filters so much into publications later on. And then they also support the scientific review of these investigator-sponsored research proposals that I just talked about previously. And then they're big kind of external meaning like, you know, external facing, meaning like working with the healthcare professionals or academic institutions or congresses. Their big external facing responsibilities include oversight for medical advisory boards. And you know, these kind of really help shape medical strategies. So an advisory board is basically when we have, like, you know, as the pharma company, we have a research question. say, for example, we are wondering whether, in immunology, there's some sort of area of really high unmet need, meaning that there's no therapies for this particular group of diseases. In terms of autoimmunity, there's a lot of actually diseases that have a high unmet need. There's no therapy for them. So we'll invite like 5 really high profile medical scientists and clinicians, and we'll kind of have like a very targeted discussion about what are these diseases with high unmet need, and then what are potential therapies and things like that. And then all of the stuff that we learn from this, we can then apply to shape our medical strategy and future research. So then the next kind of snapshot I want to give is of not a field medical role, but basically someone called the field medical communications lead. So this is a role within medical, affairs. Typically, these people are based in like the corporate office, and they kind of oversee, the medical science liaisons, not like their day-to-day things, but they basically collect information from medical science liaisons. They provide the medical science liaisons with like data updates. So if there's new trials coming up or a new publication, they provide them with market events. So if there's drugs that are being launched that are competitors, the medical communications leads are the ones that are responsible for like informing the MSLs, of this stuff, just so they can stay really up to date on their knowledge. So they train the MSLs on new publications, new content, and then they also provide input on the content and like really help drive, basically what's needed. So they also provide insight during strategic discussions. They help lead Congress planning and execution, including training the field personnel before and after the Congress. After the Congress, they'll kind of come up with insight reports. So basically, kind of what they saw, was like the most important thing that was on everyone's minds during the Congress, the hot topics, what kind of made the biggest splash. So it's kind of like competitive intelligence a little bit. And then, they also work closely with internal collaborators from other parts of medical affairs in order to form kind of training plans for field medical. So this is kind of an important role, and it's really a strategy role, right? You're collecting insights from the MSLs with what they're seeing. And you can see, sometimes there's geographic differences. Well, in the South, physicians aren't so much worried about this, but in the North, they are. So, the field medical communications leads kind of take all that information and synthesize it and then help drive future discussions. So it's a really important role. And then this is just an image that I kind of got, from the internet, really, kind of showing how what medical affairs really is. It's 2 parts. It's the strategy. So the strategy comes from us getting insights. It comes from us collecting data. It comes from the physicians themselves. And I think that's what this medical narrative, kind of means, is that we're collecting all this information in order to form a strategy, and then we're executing on that strategy. So that means the field medical people are providing stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder means, basically like the physicians, nurses, the hospital systems. Those are all kind of stakeholders. So we're executing on providing them with good information. We're executing by creating these publications. We're executing by going to congresses. So really, medical affairs is about these two things: a comprehensive strategy and then executing on that strategy. And everybody in medical affairs really has a role in both of these. They both help drive strategy and execute on it. And there's really not a role that just does one or the other. Like, you have to be versed in both. So we're going to do a case study, but I just wanted to pause a little bit, take a break, because this is like a lot of information about medical affairs, which I know, is kind of like a maybe not something you've heard about before, and see if you have any questions before we kind of launch into it. And then if not, we'll just take like a 5-minute break anyway, and come back to it after kind of digesting that for a little bit. All right, so if there's no questions, Christine, do you want to take a 5-minute break before we launch in?
Sure, I think that's fine. So we'll just keep up our Zoom room, and folks can feel free to turn off their webcams and mute themselves if
I got everybody back in. Yeah.
I see I'm back on the big screen here. All good.
Yeah,
and then yeah, we'll resume in about 5 minutes or so. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen too.
Okay, sounds good. All right. To be continued. Thank you.
Hey everyone. Yeah, we can resume. I now found how I can both screen share and see everyone. So now I'll feel better because it's like, when you're talking and you're just talking and you only see a slide and you're like, I can't see anyone's faces, but now I can. And I can see the chat too. And I saw that I see the chat, and I see that there was a student from High Ching's Lab who told me to tell you hi. That's sweet. And then I also see a question about hierarchy of roles and how it's collaborative, which it is. My medical data generation person is pinging me right now, and she's like, I need your input on this data and how we want to break it down. So, it's kind of cool because we really rely on each other. And, even though she's the one that's kind of, looking at the data and extracting it from our clinical trials, she's asking me for input to see, what is kind of like the best way to present it and if it's cool and things like that. I also will be touching at the end, I'll talk about work-life balance, and then I literally have a slide showing you exactly what the salary ranges are for these roles. And not really the hierarchy, but there's different, within each of these kind of, roles. There's publication managers, there's publication senior managers, there's associate director, director. So in pharma, there's a very, there's a very set path in terms of like promotions. So it basically goes like, when you enter as a PhD, a PharmD, or probably not an MD, they kind of try to get them straight into like director roles, which is kind of annoying. But so, as PhDs, we enter usually at like a manager, senior manager level, and then, you get promoted for associate director, then director, senior director, executive director, and then VP, senior VP, and then like after the senior VP, you're like I guess you would be like, executive like kind of roles, which are like the CEO or like the CMO or things like that. So there's like a lot of levels, and which is great because it allows for a lot of mobility within the company too. The other kind of cool thing is you can switch between these roles. If, after 2 years you do content and you're like, what, I want to do publications now, you can do that. You can apply to work on publications after coming from content. Or if you decide that you're like, what, I think I might want to do work on clinical trials, but not from like a research perspective, but like from, the clinical trial leads that kind of help develop the protocols for the clinical trials. They kind of help, collect the data. Those people, people from publications have actually gone into working on the clinical aspect too. So, just within the company, there's a lot of mobility. If you're like, after a year or two, you're like, well, this isn't quite the role for me. The world is your oyster because you've already been interacting with everyone else in the company. And you really get to learn what they do. And you're like, what, actually, I would love to do competitive intelligence. So competitive intelligence is super cool. You basically collect all this information on your competitors, what type of therapy they're working on, their timing for drug launches. You kind of help position the data when you present it to everybody else in the company. You're like, hey, they just had this trial. Yeah, maybe the efficacy is a little bit better in their trial than our drug, but their safety is worse, right? So you know, you're the person that's kind of like collecting all this information, synthesizing it, and kind of helping create messaging so that when you know, you don't want to present something without context to like your medical affairs colleagues. So, you know, that's another kind of cool role. So there's just so many, but so hopefully this will be a little bit more interactive. We're going to do like a case study. I know case studies are a little bit, you know, more of like a consulting thing, but really, you know, the consultants that help us, you know, they're basically doing these types of exercises for us too. So I'll begin by basically kind of describing, you know, you know, from the outset what's going on. So this is a new drug launch. We're launching it in the U.S. only, so not in Europe or anything like that at this time. We expect approval very soon. And the drug is for major depression, MDD. And what we want to do is we want to, prior to launch, we want to design a medical strategy. And the way that we're going to do it is, you know, we'll kind of work through it together. But first I'll tell you like a little kind of a key, what I call key points about this launch. So all right. So this drug, the mystery drug that I'm talking about, it's not an SSRI, which is, you know, the typical drugs that are currently kind of used as first-line therapies, meaning they're basically the first drugs that are used when a person is diagnosed. Is called a first-line drug. So first-line drugs are typically SSRIs. So this drug that we're launching is not an SSRI. So it has a different mechanism of action. The clinical trial that we just conducted, where we saw the drug was successful, it only enrolled patients that were newly diagnosed with major depression. So they were newly diagnosed, meaning that they were diagnosed less than a year ago. So all the patients have only had a major depression diagnosis for less than a year. And the participants in this trial had 1 to 2 prior failed treatments, meaning they tried probably an SSRI or some other type of treatment. And, you know, they basically found that those treatments didn't work. So our clinical trial enrollees, this was, this is their demographic. So another key point is that the drug is already approved for postpartum depression in the US. So, just keep that in mind. It's already been approved for a couple of years. It's been used for this, etc. The drug is a once daily oral pill. That's also important to keep in mind. And then the safety profile is good. It's basically the same side effects as typical selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So this is kind of like the background information that, I guess I'm giving you. So with that in mind, we're going to think and pretend that we're the field medical people. And we are about a year or two out, and people know that this drug is nearing launch. The clinicians know that this drug is nearing launch. And we are going to think about 3 things. So 1, what are some of the concerns that healthcare practitioners may have about this drug? Number 2, what are the barriers for prescribing the drug? And then 3, what kind of insights can we as field medical provide from the healthcare practitioners to give the broader team to shape an effective medical strategy? So let's kind of answer the first one first. So think about what kind of concerns healthcare practitioners might have about this drug based on these kind of key points. And you can put them in the chat, or you could just, talk.
sort of cross interactions with other medications be a factor of concern here?
Yeah, definitely. Since there's such limited data, these clinical trials don't enroll more than, I don't know, 400 patients typically. It depends, it obviously depends what type of clinical trial, but, for an MDD trial, a typical enrollment number is like 500 patients. So you're getting a small snapshot of, some of those patients might be taking vitamin supplements. There is inclusion and exclusion criteria. So sometimes we exclude patients in these clinical trials that have epileptic disorders or something like that, things like that. But again, because these clinical trials have like these very perfect patient populations, I would say, you're right. Like, we don't know in the wild, right? Like when normal people are taking it, they're taking other drugs. We don't know what interactions there's going to be. So that's a good point. So what are some other concerns that healthcare providers might have? I'm going to go to the chat and see if there's anything there. Long-term side effects, yeah, that's a big one, a huge one. This is a new drug, right? We won't know what the side effects are long-term until it's been on the market for a long time. It's been approved for postpartum depression for 2 years, but that's still not a lot of evidence, right? Cost of producing the drug, that's something the company worries about. But just cost of the drug, yeah, that's another big concern. It's a new drug, it's a new mechanism of action, it's first in its class, and that means typically drugs that are first in class are a little bit more expensive than therapies where there's 10 different SSRIs to choose from. Faster onset dosing could be an issue. Yeah, dosing is a big issue. Typically, dosing is worked out really well in phase 1-2 trials. So the way that we kind of choose dosing for patients, we do multiple and single ascending dose studies. So dosing should, by the time the drug is launched, be less of an issue. Yeah, dependency and withdrawal symptoms, that's a big concern in typical SSRIs. Won't know, until a few years down the line what'll happen with this drug. And especially withdrawal symptoms. That's a big one, because with SSRIs, there are bad withdrawal symptoms. What about with this drug, right? No idea. How insurance companies, how will they do it? Basically, in terms of this, what you're looking at, you're convincing insurance companies about the value of this drug versus typical SSRIs. And actually, typical SSRIs just have such, big failure rates. And let's just pretend that this drug is more effective. Doctors aren't going to prescribe something that patients are not going to be able to afford. That's true. So that is something that is going to be taken care of by our market access team. So this is another team within medical, not specifically medical affairs. They're more in the commercial arm, but they basically are the people that are having discussions with Medicare, Medicaid insurance companies, and trying to convince them to put the drug on the formulary, meaning they'll cover it with insurance. So, medical affairs can provide input on that, and we're the ones that provide the data for it, right? But then there's a separate part of the company that has the discussions specifically with the insurer. So Yeah, these are all awesome. So we already talked about what are the barriers. You know, there's so many barriers here. And then let's talk about what kind of insights can the field medical people that are out there in the field talking to people, what kind of insights can they get from the healthcare practitioners to shape the medical strategy? So
would this be like gathering sort of the anecdotal, sort of experiences of sort of patients, doctors, as far as like, hey, these may not be official clinical side effects, but I've seen several patients experience XYZ?
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be, well, my patients have only been on SSRIs. They are hesitant to try something with a new mechanism of action, right? Because they don't know about the side effects.
Is the mechanism of action known on this drug too?
Yeah, it would be known. Sometimes it's not known. A lot of times it's not known. Yeah, what age range of patients may be interested in this drug? That's a good one. Typically, younger patients are probably, more likely to try new therapies, especially if they're told that like the safety info is the same as like the old therapies, right? So yeah, there's just a lot of things that, that a lot of insights that we can learn from just talking to the prescribers, the doctors, because they're the ones that are dealing with the patients, right? And the patients are really, they're the decision makers, right? So, they can be given an option for this drug, but we want to know what their hesitation is.
Sorry, if I could ask real quickly, would this also fall into the realm of like how likely, doctors and patients giving feedback as far as how likely are they to adhere to the treatment regimen? I mean, like a once daily pill seems kind of gold standardish, but like there's things where like you have to do 3 times a week, or like are patients more or less likely to take a drug because of the sort of complexities?
Totally. Yeah. So that's what we call retention. So, patient retention is really important. That's a big thing that, some of these trials that we conduct and some of these, post hoc analyses, we look at retention. So, say there was 500 people taking the drug in the clinical trial, but not everybody finishes the clinical trial still taking the drug. They might have dropped off because of an adverse event, or just they just want to stop taking it. So we look at retention. Yeah. The physicians can also give us information of maybe what type of patient is more likely to use the drug and keep being on the drug, etc. So in SSRIs have a low retention rate in general, just because they have such a slow onset of action that people will take it for like 4 weeks and they won't feel different, right? But this drug, we're hoping that retention is less of an issue because the onset of action is within, less than a week rather than, 4 weeks. Like typical antidepressants, honestly, it's like 6 weeks is kind of the sweet spot. So these are really good. So this is just some stuff that I came up with, and we already touched upon this. So the HCPs themselves report that they're unsure about the mechanism of action. It's not an SSRI, so they don't. It's a new drug. They don't know how it works, right? So this is what we're learning. We're learning that they don't know how to do a switch from SSRIs to the new drug, right? Like we touched upon this. How do you withdraw from the SSRI and then switch to this new drug? Like, is there a protocol for doing that? They don't know how to choose the right patients, which we are already talked about. You know, which patients are the ones that are going to benefit the most, which patients are the ones that we're going to retain. You know, basically this is a huge issue for them, right? HCPs report that they're worried that this is a new drug, meaning, like we talked about, you know, limited safety data, no data on dependency, withdrawal, you know, things like that. So additionally, they worry that their patients look different than their clinical trial enrollees, which we talked about too. So, you know, these clinical trial enrollees excluded for so many different reasons, because we're, you know, we want like a highly controlled trial. But in the real world, the people that are going to take this drug don't look like the clinical trial enrollees, right? They have comorbidities, they have, you know, cardiovascular problems, they have, you know, maybe they didn't fail just 1 or 2 SSRIs, maybe they've been cycling through 4 or 5 SSRIs, or maybe it's, you know, they've never been on any type of treatment. So, you know, the people who are going to be taking this, they're not going to look like the clinical trial enrollees. So how effective is it going to be in the broader population? So these are all of the things that basically we're learning. And then we're taking all of this information and we're using this information, you know, from the real world in order to shape our medical strategy. So, so there's kind of, the title of this slide is different. You know, some of these insights can be grouped into long and short-term plans. So the mechanism of action, we know what it is, that's short-term, so we can educate. Report that they don't know how to switch from SSRIs to the new drug. We can offer some long and short-term solutions here too. We can offer a solution based on, you know, in our clinical trials, what we did and how we switched, but we can also design future trials to see if, is that the best way of switching? You know, do we taper the dose of an SSRI first and then switch to the new drug? Do we taper the dose and then when you're at 25% at the SSRI, start on a low dose of the new drug and then taper up? So, you know, there's different protocols for how to switch, and we don't know the right one yet. We know what we have done, so we can offer some kind of long and short-term, you know, plan. Choosing the right patients for the therapy, again, long and short-term. These are the patients that, you know, we think this will work for, but we can target future clinical trials to see which ones it really works well for. Maybe it works well for patients with a certain biomarker. Maybe it works well for patients of a certain demographic for some reason. You know, maybe it works well for patients that haven't tried any therapy. So we don't know yet. They're worried about this because it's a new drug. That's safety. So we can do a lot of short-term things to help, and we can do a lot of long-term things to help. So, you know, in basically everything, you're coming up with solutions like short-term and long-term. So this is our medical strategy that I came up with. So number one, so every medical strategy is basically you're trying to drive, you know, short and long-term planning, right? So number one, education on mechanism, safety, and efficacy. So that is our, you know, number one off the gate. This is the most important thing. And this is going to be, you know, helping to develop materials and publications on the current available information from the trials. So our second part of our medical strategy is to break down barriers for both patients and healthcare professionals. So, you know, here we identified some of the barriers. It's patient fears about safety. It's fears from physicians because they don't know how to switch. It is, things like that. So we're using both the current available information that we have from the trials, and then we're also thinking about kind of long-term, planning too. And then the third part of our medical strategy is enabling use in the correct patients. So that is, really, should be a part of every strategy, right? That is going to be our kind of long-term planning goal. So we're going to plan trials. We're going to plan around a data generation strategy in order to basically identify who are the correct patients, who are the patients that are going to, do well on this drug, and how do we identify those patients. So that's our medical strategy. So this is what a medical plan looks like. This is what a medical strategy looks like. And then you go into the planning, right? So then each other function in medical affairs will have their own plans based on this medical strategy. So for publications, I'll take these three things and I'll form a publication plan, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to do a review article on the mechanism. I want to do a series of reviews so that we can have, peer-reviewed published literature out there about the mechanism of action, how it ties into the therapeutic effect of this drug. And then obviously we're going to publish the information on safety and efficacy in our clinical trial publications. So, number two, the breaking down barriers for patients and HCPs. Maybe we'll do more safety studies. So, I'll ask my safety physicians to kind of think about, how can we, give more data to the physicians so that they're comfortable switching, things like that. And then, enabling use in the correct patients, same thing. Like I'll use the people, our clinical trial physicians, and we'll kind of shape a data generation strategy and then publish the results of that. So basically every function, once you have a medical strategy, every function then takes that strategy and we execute on it. So for pubs, I execute the publications, and the publications kind of harken back to this medical strategy. And then for congresses, this is also same thing. We execute our Congress presentations based on this strategy. So that's kind of what I mean about like the medical strategy and the execution. So it's kind of like a round circle where, we learn things, and then we try to execute on what we learned, basically. So I think, this is basically, what, kind of another reiteration of you can then imagine every one of these people can then execute on the medical strategy in order to kind of drive, the strategy. So now I have just a little sub exercise. So we're going to take a look at this enabling use in the correct patients and the long-term phase 4 clinical trial planning and the data generation strategy. And we're going to think about how these 4 groups are going to work together on a data generation strategy. So now I realize that this is kind of like really open-ended, but so how do we identify the correct patients based on the data that's available to us already? And this is actually a scientific question. So we have 500 patients from these trials. How do we know which ones benefited the most? You look backwards is basically the answer. So you look at the patients that completed the trial, that had what we call remission from depression. So you're looking at, let's say there was 250 patients, 50% that at the end of the trial had remission from depression. So these patients, you know, were still on the drug, and they had really good scores on, there's, you know, these clinical depression scales and things like that. So these 50% of these patients, 250 out of 500, responded really well. So who found that out? It was our medical data generation leads, right? Because they're the ones that are now cutting the data in different ways to look at different, you know, kind of post hoc analyses. So what can we do with that information? Like, we know who these patients are. What can we do with the information?
Do you mean in terms of like giving that sort of demographic details to healthcare providers for the sake of like, these are targeted first patients to use for this?
Yeah, that's basically it. Honestly, it's like we can look at these patients and see how they're different from the patients that didn't do well on the drug. What were the differences? You know, that's kind of what we're looking for. And that's how we get closer to identifying the right patient, right? It's like, okay, so, you know, we're basically looking at how, let's say these 250 patients that did well, they differed from the patients that didn't do well, because they didn't try any SSRIs before they enrolled, or they only tried one and failed one. But the patients that failed two, then, you know, they had higher rates of, you know, not doing well on this drug. So that's really powerful information, right? Because it tells us, okay, in order for this drug to be most effective, these people have to be new users with little history of, you know, drug, like prior SSRI use. Or maybe the data will tell us that the patients that did well on this drug were, I don't know, they were women. Maybe that's it. Or maybe they were had a certain biomarker. Maybe they, you know, were a certain age. So, you know, you don't know what the data is going to tell you. It's going to tell you something. Sometimes it can be really confusing, but like the data will tell you things. So the way that these four groups will work together, just in this example, is we're gonna go, you know, we're gonna pretend that these 250 patients that did well were the patients that took the drug with little prior interventions, is what we call it. So they had little prior intervention. They failed one or zero prior treatments, and those are the people that did well. So now basically, you know, the trial leads produce this information. The medical directors basically say, hey, okay, this is our new strategy. This is how we're, you know, we found that the drug works well in this. And then the publication leads, they're the ones that are publishing this data. And then the scientific content leads are basically, you know, creating documents so that our field people can use this information and help doctors identify the right patients. So everyone's working together, you know, in order to basically drive, you know, that one medical strategy imperative. So yeah, it's, you know, it's very interactive. Everyone kind of just works together. And really the goal is to, you know, find the right patients and provide the best care to the right patients, right? All right, so I'm going to pause. And that was a pretty good case study. That's a very typical case study. So this is the kind of stuff that, you know, you're basically doing in medical affairs. but with much more detail, it's much more granular. You know, everyone's working together. You're kind of getting information left and right from different people, and you're really synthesizing that information. So I'll just pause to see if anyone has any questions on medical affairs or publications. So I currently lead publications for an immunosuppressive drug. It is a rheumatoid arthritis drug. So rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disorder. A lot of people don't know that, actually. You know, so some of the examples that I used at the beginning were from my own experience. I started my position March 30th, 2020. And I was working on an immunosuppressant. So the physicians that, you know, are prescribing the drug were like, do we stop our patients from being on it because now their immune systems are suppressed and they could get COVID? Like, these are all questions that we had, right? So yeah, just, you know, let me know if you have any questions on med affairs or publications. And then I'll kind of jump into some of the like more bread and butter stuff about roles. Well, I think at the end of the presentation, I also put my email address. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I guess, you know, maybe before going into the next section, maybe I can just tell you, you know, a common question is, how do you break into medical affairs, right? How do you get there? I didn't like finish my PhD and then just get a job at a pharma company doing pubs, right? That's not typical, but it's not unheard of. So there's a couple of avenues for breaking into medical affairs. So after my PhD, I worked for a small consulting company that worked with just pharma companies. So it was like a really boutique consulting firm. We only consulted on medical affairs, health economics research. So I got to do projects on publications, on scientific content, you know, all of these things. I got to do projects for 3 years on basically a ton of different topics within medical affairs and within clinical. And then after that, I knew that I liked publications and I liked content and I liked working with medical directors. So I applied for jobs, and actually the first job that I got, it was another person that used to be my colleague in the consulting company recommended me for the role because they were looking for a communications lead. So he was like, hey, I know somebody that might be good for this. And he told the hiring manager, and this was at Alcon, Novartis. And that's how I got my first role in pharma. It was actually medical device plus pharma. But so I did consulting for 3 years. But, you know, you don't have to do just consulting. There is medical communications agencies that provide support to medical affairs departments. I work with a lot of them right now. Like, you know, I have a budget and to conduct like my work, and, you know, I use agencies to help me conduct my work. And these agencies provide the medical writing expertise. So I don't do the writing myself because these manuscripts that I work on are like behemoths. There could be like, you know, 10 authors from academic institutions around the world, and then like 3 internal authors, and there's so much compliance documentation. So I use an agency that has like 5 people that are working specifically on, you know, our slew of publications. And, you know, a lot of times the people at those agencies then hop over to pharma and medical affairs because they know basically how it works. Another avenue is I've seen now that there are fellowships for PhD students right out of their PhD. So instead of doing like a postdoctoral fellowship in a lab, you can do a postdoctoral fellowship in medical affairs and do rotations through these different med affairs kind of functions for about a year or two. I think most of them are 2 years. And then after that, you can basically choose which one's right for you, see what you like the most, and get a job there. So I know that Biogen actually has a really good medical affairs postdoctoral fellowship program. And I think more companies have them. BMS, my company, it's based out of New Jersey, Princeton, New Jersey. We have a fellowship program for PharmDs, but we don't have one right now for PhDs. So a lot of the people that get hired right out of their PharmD are the people coming from these fellowship programs. And they kind of do the same thing where, you know, for a year or two, they kind of help out with different, you know, projects on the medical affairs side, and then they get hired on. So those are just some of the avenues. You know, I don't know, maybe you can apply for some manager level positions right out of your PhD if, you know, you want. I just don't know if that's rare or not. I literally, just because, you know, my path was consulting, medical communications, and then I hopped into pharma. You know, that's kind of how it worked out for me, but there's definitely, you know, different avenues. Oh yeah, this is some of my favorite things about medical affairs. So you're using scientific knowledge, but you're learning new things all the time. You're working with like really awesome people. They're professional, they're interesting, they're PharmDs, they're MDs, they're MBAs. You know, it's just, you know, your work environment is great. And everyone's just, you know, professional and, you know, happy, honestly, you know, like I'm shocked how happy people are in pharma. It was, you know, one of the things that really attracted me to the roles is that, you know, everyone likes what they're doing because they're being challenged. But they also feel like they're really making a difference and helping because you are. And then helping HCPs and patients get the right knowledge, which is, you know, super important. And that's how I really feel like I'm making a difference, because I'm helping publish, you know, the data on, say, enabling, you know, use in the right patients, or enabling use in, you know, these patient groups, et cetera. And then again, a lot of mobility within medical affairs, able to switch roles. You know, you kind of gain a lot of info about that. I see the work-life balance question. I would say working in pharma, my work-life balance is better than when I was in consulting. I mean, I literally work just 8-hour days. That's it. And I am, yeah, I know. I'm able to shut off my computer. And honestly, I do still check like my email, my phone later on, but there's usually nothing that is just so imperative that I need to get to it right away. Like pretty much everything can, you know, can wait. But I think that that's me, and there are people that I work with whose calendars are super full, and they just like never have time for anything. But I kind of feel like that's their own doing. So, you know, I think you can be highly effective and like literally work 8-hour days. You just have to use your time wisely and get everything done. And once you're proficient at your role, like, you know, I find that like my work-life balance is great. I live in Manhattan. I have a 2-year-old kid. Like she's on, like her daycare schedule is like 8 a.m. Got to pick her up by 6. So I like get her there at 8. I go home. I make my coffee. I work. Right now I'm working mostly remotely. And then at like, 5:30, I put the computer away and I go get her. So that's pretty much it. My coworkers are awesome. And, I have coworkers that live close to me and we'll even go grab, drinks or dinner just as friends after work. So that's the other nice thing is, like your coworkers become friends too, just because they are, usually just so similar to you and you have really shared like values, shared interests and stuff like that. So yeah, honestly, work-life balance is great. And that's specifically at my company. BMS is, they just, I don't know, like everyone has families. It's super family friendly. They have like these weird family events that I don't really go to, but, it's, they really care about their, their workers, I guess. Yeah, so that's, work-life balance is better than the lab. Don't tell Hai-Ching I said that. So here's the pay scales for medical affairs, and this is for PhDs, and this is just info that's literally public on Glassdoor. You could go to any like average pharmaceutical company, like, Astellas Pharma, and type in, senior manager at Astellas Pharma, and like you'll get a pay scale, pay range, and this is it. So really for PhDs, kind of entry level, which would be manager, senior manager level, probably at the smaller pharma companies, you're looking at maybe a little bit less than 100K. But, I would say, if you have like less than 4 years experience, senior manager level, like you're topping out at 140. And then associate director level is like 140, 190. And of course there's wiggle room on each end. And then director level, and then senior director level. And then of course there's, all the levels that I talked about earlier, which I don't know what they make actually, but it's a lot. So this isn't your full compensation package. So this is just your base salary. So in addition to this, I think once you hit like senior manager level, if your company is publicly traded, you get a stock incentive. So this is basically a stock award, and they give it to you every year. And it's a certain value. So let's just take a senior manager, for example. They get a stock award that's worth $10,000 worth of stock every year. And you don't get that stock like right away. It's on a vesting schedule. So every year you get 25% of it. So if you stay for a year, you now own 2,500 worth of stock. The next year you own another 2,500 worth of stock. But then remember, the next year you're getting another stock award, which is on a 4-year vesting schedule. So it's just this kind of like, it's basically their way of keeping you. Because if you're not fully vested, your stock is not fully vested, you lose it. So, if I leave after 3 years and I'm senior manager level and I had 3 stock awards, I actually am not leaving with 30K worth of stock. I'm leaving with whatever's vested, which would be, I don't know, I can't even do the calculation, but let's just say like you're leaving with, 15,000 worth of stock and you're losing 15. So it's just kind of, they call it a long-term incentive because it is a long-term incentive. If you stay for 10 years, hopefully after 10 years, you've moved up a level, and like at associate director level, you get more stock, and then at director level, you get more stock. So, in the end, you're leaving, you know, if you leave the company after 10 years and you've worked your way up to director level, you could be walking away with like, I don't know, $300,000 worth of stock. It's insane. So that like pays for your kids' college, right? So, you know, these pharma companies really have, it's really good incentive. So in addition to this long-term incentive like stock awards, you're also getting a bonus every year. So it's a different percentage bonus for all of these levels. At the associate director level, it's like 18%. At the director level, a typical bonus is 20%. And your bonus is calculated based on company performance. So if your company is performing well, and your individual performance. So say you went super above and beyond this year and you really excelled in like something, you know, your manager kind of determines that. And then, you know, you say you make 200K a year and your bonus is 20%. You're expecting, if your bonus pays out at 100%, you're expecting like an extra $40,000 cash award as your bonus. But of course, taxes get taken out, blah, blah, blah. But if for some reason both your company performs well and you perform super well, you know, instead of 20%, you might get a 30% bonus, which is awesome. So, you know, this is kind of just the way that the company incentivizes you to work well, and this is how they reward you for it. And, you know, at the higher levels, your performance is tied to company performance, right? So, you know, if you're like a VP, like you get a massive stock award and, you know, you get a big bonus too. And your performance is really tied to how well the company is doing. So, you know, you're kind of rewarded for that. So that's basically, you know, for medical affairs, these are like the typical rates. And again, look on Glassdoor. It's literally all publicly available information and things like that. So, you know, that's the other nice thing is like when you're negotiating pay, like Glassdoor is amazing. It's like so transparent. It's like, you know what people are making. It's not really a mystery. Does anyone have any questions on this or about like just compensation packages in pharma, or, you know, how easily or not easily it is to get promoted, et cetera, things like that?
I have a question. Thank you so much for doing this. So you mentioned that currently your publications, like in charge of publications for this specific drug. So what do you do after, you know, like what, I guess whatever you need to do for this drug is over? Like once it is approved and is officially a drug, like what's next?
Yeah, so actually the drug that I work on has been on the market for 15 years. So it's approved, it's been on the market, but in order for, you know, the company to keep, you know, making money like in the end, right? But in order for the drug to keep being like useful, we kind of keep producing new data. In addition to that, we pursue new indications. So which means like, you know, the drug that I work on currently is approved for rheumatoid arthritis. It was approved for rheumatoid arthritis 15 years ago. But since that, we have explored if this drug could be beneficial in other diseases. So in addition to, you know, approval in RA, it's also approved in psoriatic arthritis. It's also approved for juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And then it's also, you know, we're actually seeking a new approval right now for a disease called acute graft versus host disease. It's a disease that patients get after they have a hematopoietic stem cell transplant. It's basically your body rejecting the the stem cell transplant. And since our drug is an immunosuppressant, but like kind of like a low key immunosuppressant, it works really well in these patients. And the patients whose bodies start rejecting this drug, reject the stem cell transplant, seems like they actually benefit from this drug too. So we're constantly exploring, even post-launch, like we're exploring new avenues for how we can use this drug, because it can be beneficial for, multiple types of different patients. It can be beneficial in different patient populations. I can talk about this because it's all publicly available information. So like if you go to the BMS website, you'll see that we applied for an indication with the FDA, for this drug in this disease area, blah, blah, blah. But we also are testing it for COVID, for, the severe forms of COVID. So I'm sure everyone knows that, like, the severe COVID, it causes an insane autoimmune response. And, the NIH is actually testing the drug that I work on to see if it can kind of help suppress the immune system during this severe COVID period. So, a drug has a life cycle, basically. So even though it's been on the market for 15 years, it's like the gift that keeps on giving for this particular drug. So even after 15 years, we're still publishing new data. We're conducting new trials. We're driving the medical strategy in different ways. We're exploring other types of diseases, autoimmune diseases that don't have current treatment options available, to see if our drug can, benefit the patients that suffer from these diseases. So it's, there's always, stuff going on, basically. Even after many years, it's the drug launch is kind of like the first hurdle. And then after that, you're looking at how to maintain the relevancy of the drug for the next 15 years until it goes off patent. And that's kind of when the company kind of de-invests from a drug, just because, we have that loss of exclusivity. So yeah, that's basically, that's a great question. And, for me personally, in publications, I'm at an associate director level right now. So like my next step would be director level. And once I get to director level, it would come with like additional responsibilities. So instead of just kind of leading the publications for one drug, maybe I'll do an entire therapeutic area. So basically, I would be leading publications for like 3 different immunology assets or something like that. Or I would be getting some direct reports, meaning like I have people working under me or something like that. And there's always like kind of restructuring that goes on in pharma companies. So there's always like opportunities to kind of, broaden your role or change your role slightly. And I even myself like take on additional responsibilities. I'm currently doing like a tour of duty. It's kind of like an extra rotation in the epidemiology department. So I'm helping design epidemiology studies for like a new drug that, isn't on the market yet. And I'm kind of like looking at the epidemiological information of our competitors. So, you basically like you form connections and you can explore, different, different kind of areas within the company as well. And that's how I came to do this, this epidemiology rotation. Is I worked with an internal author on some studies, and he was like, hey, do you want to do a rotation in my department, like, and learn some epidemiology? I was like, all right, yeah, that's kind of relevant right now. So Yeah, any other questions? I think we're like basically at time. You know, this is my email address if you have questions. But feel free to basically ask me anything now or later. Hopefully this info was useful. I heard that you didn't learn about medical affairs prior to this. I was worried about that, that you might have learned about it, but you know, I'm glad I was able to like provide kind of a like insight and you know, a different kind of area for PhDs to explore.